Today's topic is, once again, an Australian scholar type, friendly tourist who's been to India many, many times in the last 50 years. And today, instead of his personal story, he's going to tell us a more academic look at India. Hello, everyone. It's good to be with you once again. And once again, I have with me Bob Smith from Australia. He used to be a professor, a government officer, and has always been in love with India for more than 50 years. And today he's going to talk about it from a somewhat more academic viewpoint. So over to you, Bob. I believe you have divided your talk into two parts. So let's start with part one.
Right, thank you very much, Subodh. As we said last time, I started out going to India teaching politics. And over the time that I was in government, as my interest returned to India, I thought, no, the politics is something that's important, but also important is governance. What do Indians think about governance? What are the terms that are used in India? Are they the same or are they different? And very importantly, what is the capability of the governmental system in India to deliver the opportunities, the standard of living, the standard of environment that Indian citizens expect, having seen what some other countries have experienced. Also, bearing in mind the deep experience of Indian civilization, which is very different from that of the European background that people in Australia have, but because of the Indo-European cultural as well as language connection, the interplay between India, Europe, and the rest of the world, especially Asia, has been extremely important. So, as I started...
Bob, before you start, let me tell you one of the most stupid jokes that Indians have about Australia. You were talking about the background, right? So there's this Indian guy who goes to Australia at immigration. They ask, do you have a criminal background? He said, oh my God, I did not know it was still a requirement.
Well, that is a standard joke, and there is a counter joke from South Australia, and that is when people talk about criminal background. Yes, we had no convicts in South Australia except the ones we convicted when we were here. And so our families were free settlers from Scotland.
I see.
And England.
Yeah.
And not like those terrible people from New South Wales are all bloody convicts.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. So go ahead, please.
Yeah, so the Australian experience is small, apparently homogeneous, and rather more internally diverse now, as I'll go on to talk about in a moment. So the first thing I wanted to say is I've moved from focus on politics to a focus on governance, focus on capability. This how ministers and civil servants work together, what they hear from citizens, what they want to hear from citizens, and what the other levels of government in India do, because the people one meets in Delhi who work in the central services are amongst the top people intellectually and elsewhere that you will meet in the world. However, as soon as you get out of Delhi, you find there is another set of Indias, which may or may not have any time for what comes from Delhi, which led me on to the issue of federalism and the Indian approach to federalism, which is a constitution, which means that the states can be changed which means that central governments can feel that they can control state politics. And this also has international implications, because compared with other federalisms, Indian federalism is less comfortable at subnational discussions with international forces, and there is a sense that the rest of the world doesn't understand India, which is very true, but to an extent, because of the sophistication of Indian civilization, India doesn't necessarily understand the world, and the way in which a country like India can represent itself to the world, deal with not only the cultural and civilizational things, but also with the nitty-gritty governmental things that are involved in world trade and all the rest of it. So I've done work on intergovernmental relations, and have built on our own experience in Australia, where federal governments, although they're financially dominant, have learnt to their cost that they need to take the state's views into account, and the states in turn are beginning to learn that they can't do everything themselves. They have to take into account what cities think, what local governments think. And there's a comparison point with India here, obviously. I moved on from there to looking at the Modi government, because I happened to be going to India at a time when the BJP was making its run up to the 2014 elections, and Narendra Modi was coming through the pack in the BJP to be the Prime Minister designate. And what struck me about this was the political sophistication of the BJP, and the extent to which its political strategies were designed not only to get into government and stay there, but also were designed to put forward an image of India which the BJP particularly felt was relevant and authentic. I then started to think, well, okay, this is a party that knows what it wants. What can it do in government? And this led me back into the capability issues, because some of the continuing themes and frustrations from the long periods of Congress rule after 1947 seem to continue under the Modi government, because political dominance seems to go only so far. And this means that I have a continuing interest in what the Modi government and other governments in India are doing with the civil service to ensure that the highly qualified civil servants who are good at particular difficult problems, say like human services, health, education, and so on, are in a position to put forward national programs which are articulated in such a way that state level people and regional level people and village level people can recognise that these are there for them. So this is a continuing project, and I'm interested in what the BJP is doing on this. In the process of doing this, because I've never done field work in India, never had a visa for field work, I turned to literature reviews, and so I looked in particular at two things. First of all, the way in which economic policy shifted from central planning through the 1991 decisions on liberalisation. And I've read a number of books about how those decisions were made, the long 10-year or more precursor attempts to shift gears, and then the ultimate story included in books by amongst others, Manmohan Singh and Montek Singh Ahluwalia, about the cabinet level discussions and the top civil service discussions that took place in order to make a big shift. And following that, I looked at the creation of Aadhaar, because there are a couple of decent books by participants about how that was done. And again, it was a long lead up, a lot of bureaucratic and political discussion, a lot of internal concern. And the one thing of interest to me was the organisational setup. Whereas for 1991, it was an informal network of civil servants working with like-minded ministers. In Aadhaar, the people who set that up said, we want a mixed civil service consultants team, private sector team. We only want people who want to be here, and we want to choose how people will work. However, because we are funded by the government, we will record all decisions in civil service style, and it will go to the ministers. And this struck me as being an organisational innovation with great potential in a country like India, with strong political currents, very highly qualified senior civil servants, and a tradition of rule-bound bureaucracy that sometimes gets in the way. And so, you can understand why you need reservations and why you need equal opportunity in a country like India in the civil service. You also need a mechanism for making sure that whoever is smart gets put on the job that their smartness is really appropriate for. So I'm interested in following that through.
Bob, can I just summarize it so that I think I understand what you're saying, and I want the viewers to understand what you're saying. What you're saying is that the 1991 reforms were pretty much within the existing structure, though perhaps the formal rules and regulations were not followed strictly, but it was done through a collaborative internal key people kind of network, and they got it done, right?
That's right.
Right. But Aadhaar was different. It had to be made public. It had to be made official. And the people who were in charge of it, which is Nilankani, demanded that he be outside the civil service, that he not be subject to the civil service rules. But what you're telling me is that they agreed to some of the civil service rules and regulations, so that they were some kind of a hybrid with an outside agency. And I believe that Nilankani recruited thousands or hundreds of techies from around the world who did not have any contact or contract, but they were just doing his work because he was Nilankani.
Well, look, I mean, Nilankani had a very good partnership with Ram Swarup, who was the Ram Swarup, who was the self-taught IAS mathematician trained, originally IT guru. And these two IT people had different connections. One business, one knew how to break the rules in the civil service to get IT in, and they put together something. And I think this is an organizational method of dealing with complex problems that's very interesting, turned out to be productive with Aadhaar, and Aadhaar has now proved to be a foundational element of India's stack. And the challenge for India and for other parts of the world that want to follow the digital path, which we're on, whether we like it or not, is to make sure that it provides not only service, but also facilities and an income and benefit life experiences for people. And the way that India Stack is developing is a very interesting outgrowth of part of the experience that Aadhaar is now seen, at least by people like me, as a sort of foundational experience for. So that's where I'm at with papers I've written. The sort of topic I'm interested in now to go with this is what this means for the further organisation of the civil service, and what are the sorts of demands that are beginning to percolate from the new cities that are coming up, from the slums where people are learning how to use politics to set brokers up, to make demands of the civil service, and at what stage some of these people will say, well, look, okay, we've got water, we've got sewage, we've got a secure tenancy, but we want our kids to go to a better school, and we want a doctor and a hospital as well. Thank you very much.
Yes.
And it seems to me that this is something that the Indian governance system and political system is going to be faced with in the next few years in a perhaps more acute way than it has been up until now. And some of the themes of politics will perhaps reflect this, and the speed at which they reflect this may be reflected in India's international performance, reputation, and also in, more importantly, in the benefits of the lives of Indians, the ordinary workers in the streets and in the suburbs and on the farms and all the rest of it, which is, I think, very important.
Okay, good.
So
you're posing the challenge that the government is going to face. That's okay.
Well,
it's enough. It's not enough to just provide water, electricity, and housing. You also got to provide education and health services, and that's going to be a challenge.
Well, it's the political challenge is pretty well recognised by the major political players in India. The organisational challenge that comes with it is perhaps not completely appreciated as it, in my view, needs to be. And this is where the comparisons with a place like Australia come in, although at first sight the comparison of Australia with India is ridiculous in terms of scale and background and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But one of the things that Australia as a non-Asian origin country in broadly Asian area is we've had, at least for most of the time since independence from Britain, a government that you can, if you don't like, you can tip it out, or you can knock it around, and it can learn. India, I think, is doing a very hard job, because it is not only coming out of a long period of foreign domination, it is also missed out on some of the organisational changes in government that took part in other parts of the world, and is now having to do that in what is a long period of the hangovers of colonisation. And so the Indian challenge is more difficult, for observers like me more interesting, and for Indian citizens living in India, of the life essence as to how they spend their time and get benefits and get the benefit of a meaningful life. So what I'd like to do now is talk a bit about how India and Australia are talking a bit more, and some of the puzzles that may come about as our relationships get perhaps closer. First of all, I'll just start by saying that in terms of comparative directions, India and Australia are going to be looking, in my view, at interests and niches rather than big things in common. There are too many things that are different about our backgrounds and our cultures and our expectations. Okay. The first interest is the Indo-Pacific security and defence, which from the Australian point of view has been a major theme in why some people in Australia are very keen on improving relations with India. The second thing is economic opportunities. Australian businesses are highly transactional. You give us shiploads of cash, we'll give you shiploads of stuff. This worked with China up to a point. India is a very different business environment, and India has different internal requirements and an economy which is still largely internally looking in many of its important aspects. And so the Australia sort of rip off and take the cash approach to trade doesn't work in India. And Peter Varghese, who wrote a very interesting thing on an Australian strategy for trade with India, being a former High Commissioner of Australia to India and also being of Kerala descent himself, made the point very strongly. You just can't do what you've done with other countries if you want to be a meaningful economic component of India's developing economic opportunities. The third thing is a selective deepening of reasonably shallow ties. The sports stuff and all the rest of it gets you the headline that jokes about Australians bouncing like kangaroos and being descended from convicts. Get you a certain way, but we have to pick the civilizational elements which we can build on. And Australia has quite a long history of wanting to have closer relations with India, but the Indian people and the Indian government have said, you're too small, you're too far away, and you look like bloody English. So we don't really see any need to spend too much time on you. So we need in Australia to make ourselves useful and interesting to India. And this is a challenge that we face. And the final thing is that socially and culturally, we're going in different directions. Australia is an explicitly multicultural country. Despite the discomfort this causes, the multiculturalism is extending. I'll go into this a bit more. We're a small federal polity with an open economy. A number of differences there. We have a change in cultural and ethnic face, which is publicly known to be policy. We have diverging patterns of religious affiliation. So whereas in India, one meets religious devotion very positively, usually very quietly at home or in private surroundings. But there is an Indian concern with religion, which the foreigner ignores at their peril. In Australia, the religious influence, particularly of Protestantism and Catholicism, is there, but it's deeply submerged in public life. And in terms of public appreciation of religion, this is to be found in the Hindu temples, the Sikh temples, the Muslim mosques, and in the Pentecostal Christian churches, which the institutional churches don't have a bar. So in terms of religion, there is a very big difference between India and Australia. And finally, in terms of our foreign policy, we're looking for friends. And so India is elected as a potential friend, a big friend, a nice friend to have. But we're hanging on the culturally similar allies, the US and the UK. And this has problems because we're living in a world where China is important, where ASEAN does not wish to be pigeonholed. India certainly does not wish to be pigeonholed. And so Australians who might say we look at India and strategic autonomy and think that's a good idea, Well, people like that are in a minority here. And this means that in our discussions, officially and unofficially with India, the search for niches and interests in common is going to be more difficult than I think a number of Australian politicians and business leaders and university leaders expect.
Mhm.
So you look again at Australia in comparison to India. India, the largest country now by population, federal, but with a very centralized governing tradition, where what is said in New Delhi is supposed to apply across the whole of India. It doesn't, but that's part of the organisational issue. It's an inward-looking economy looking now to manufacturing opportunities with a big digital opportunity, which it hasn't yet learned how to monetize, although that's on the way. Social and religious practice in India is closely intertwined, and assertive Hindu nationalism of the current government, and its drive to regain a global standing fairly taken away in colonial times, means that when India is looking for friends, it's looking for friends on its terms, and it's hanging on for dear life to strategic autonomy. And so therefore, Australia's challenge is to talk to India in India's terms and to persuade India to recognise that Australians are not simply people who are surrogate Americans or Europeans, but we are attempting to come to terms with the part of the world that we have transplanted ourselves into. Mm-hmm. And so this is, I think, it's very interesting to study. It's somewhat frightening to be a citizen of a country like Australia living in these circumstances. But the final thing I'll say is just to come back to why India is an interest to me. It's always seemed to be intrinsically interesting. You can pick lots of countries in the world to say, yeah, there's something interesting going on. But India is a drug because it's like teaching. You never know exactly what you think you need to know. There's always something that you need to go further into. Okay. You combine this with the rich diversity of Indiannesses. And the final thing I'll say is about India is you can usually tell who's an Indian, even though they look different, they speak differently, they eat different food, they appear to have nothing in common. They know they're Indian. You can tell they're Indian, and that makes them a particularly interesting mob of people, and there are a lot of them, and so you can never exhaust meaningful interest.
All right. Well, that's very good. I mean, in a layman's terms, I would say what you're saying is that India is India and Australia is Australia. And between the two, we'll have to look carefully for common ground. There is common ground, but there is a lot of uncommon ground also. And it'll be up to both the governments, both the countries, to find the common ground and make good use of it, right? And I think that's right. The common ground is not easy to find because, as you said, India wants things on its own terms. And, well, that's everybody wants things on its own terms. So if you are going to want things on its own terms, the most famous example that I think I know of is that McDonald's doesn't sell beef hamburgers in India because India wants hamburgers on its own terms, right? So nobody told them that you cannot, there's no law that says you cannot sell beef hamburgers, but they know that if they sell beef hamburgers, they are going to lose money in India, right? It's not going to work. So they adapted to the Indian market, and that's how they found the common ground, that you
That's right.
you sell them what they want to eat, not what you know how to make, right?
That's right.
You figure it out, and IKEA is doing the same thing now, that they are in the IKEA stores, they are not selling Swedish meatballs, they sell biryani. They do. Because in every other country they sell Swedish meatballs, but not in India. They sell biryani. So some common ground has to be found, I think. And I'm certainly not one who knows what that is. But I'm glad you have told us that that's what it is, that there's going to have to be common ground. And both India and Australia have to work on it in some way so that both can benefit from the mutual interests, I would say.
That's right.
Right? Okay. Well, that's a very thoughtful, you have laid out the differences in terms of the politics, the culture, the civilization, and all those, I think, are very important to keep in mind when you are dealing with each other across the table, trying to find that common ground, which can bring you together in some way. That's a win-win situation, right? Yeah, okay, fine. Thank you so much. It's a very helpful, and your understanding of how governance in India works, which is not politics. It's not government, it's governance, how you can deliver the things that people want, how you set up the systems by which these things happen. And I'm just thinking of the midday lunch that was introduced in what was called Madras and Tamil Nadu, which was a way, way back, I think it's before independence even, that they introduced this midday lunch for children, right, in schools, right? So that they knew that the children don't have enough to eat at home, and how can they study if they're hungry, right? So they introduced this midday meal, and it's very successful. It's a very successful form of governance, that you give the school children midday lunch. And actually, one of the problems of the pandemic in the US was that when the school shut down, the midday lunch for the poor children also shut down. But then they actually realized that, and they set up midday lunch counters for those children. Because they said, they don't have the money, and with the pandemic, they lose their jobs also. So how these kids going to get their midday meal, which is subsidized if you are poor, and even if you are not poor, it's subsidized to some extent. So they did set up the midday lunch, and I think the midday lunch is sort of a symbol of recognizing the needs of the children, because the children are the future. And anyway, I'm glad you have brought all this to our attention, and I think that's a great job you have done. And I think we should stop here unless you have some last words to say.
No, my last word, Subodh, is, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. Secondly, I think that discussions of this kind between people in Australia, people like you happen to be in America, but for an Indian audience are extremely important, because it's our former High Commissioner in India, Peter Varghese, used to say, it's the interpersonal stuff that really makes relationships between countries improve. The opportunities come when the people are in touch with each other and seriously trying to understand each other. So thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, so maybe I'll try to set up some form of Zoom call where people can come. Maybe you and somebody else can have invited guests, invited people, and we can do a Zoom call. They can ask you questions and so on and have a dialogue. Let's see. I'll try to think about it. In the meantime, thank you, Bob. It's been great to hear from you. You've long been a family friend and supporter, and personally my supporter. So thank you so much. Let's end it here. Bye-bye, folks, and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, Bob, thank you. The recording's over. Wonderful job. Yeah. Thank you, as always. And it's very late at night now for me, so I will process it next morning. Okay.
I'm sorry. Sorry.
No,
to
no,
keep you
it's
up.
okay. This is my time to watch Netflix.
Okay. Well, I'll let you watch Netflix or go to bed.
Right. Okay. No, going to bed. I still have to get my quota of Netflix. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Sabot.
Yeah.
See you
Bye-bye.
later.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.